Hey everybody, welcome to Pride in the Word Virtual Edition 2021. I'm your host, Johnny Trinh. I'm also one of your storytellers tonight. I have to say, it is an incredible honor to be among this amazing panel of storytellers. I want to recognize that it seems weird to be virtual. It seems weird to be celebrating Pride in a really strange time when we have old growth loss, uncovering of graves, remembering folks that did not survive the residential school system, hearing of families being snuffed out because of hatred, or ethnicities, whole communities of people being blamed for a global pandemic. It's a lot. But it's also so important to gather, to share story, because right now in this moment, we get to decide what happens next. That's the power of storytelling. That's the power of community, which is what tonight's about. Whenever I work with storytellers, I often ask, what are the stories we're telling? What stories are we bringing from our ancestral homes? What is the cost of the stories we tell? What stories are lost or silenced because we are taking up space? It's part of my process of acknowledging the privilege to tell stories and the land that we're on. And so with that, I wanted to take a moment to honor and recognize that we are sharing this event with you virtually, with readers and storytellers from across Turtle Island, but the event itself is rooted on the traditional lands of the SÁNEĆ, Lekwungen, Songhees, Esquimalt, Coast Salish nations. Thanks so much for being here together with us. I'd like to welcome Elder Butch Stick from the Lekwungen traditional territory of the Coast Salish Nation.
So thank you for this opportunity to welcome you to the Lekwungen territory. I appreciate the invitation to share some time with you and also to make you feel welcome in our territory. So Asiyam Nushjelicha, Asiyam Nushwalakwa, Aishkwa Kwansana, Techo Lekwungen Tanuch, Aichka Siyam Nakwilia. And that's a typical welcome to our territory that we use in all gatherings and in the welcome to our territory. And I really hope that you do feel welcome. And I hope that your celebration goes well. And with the pandemic just about ending, I think we're getting closer to real hugs and shaking hands, so it's I think the past year has made us very vulnerable, but I think we can get together as a community again and welcome everybody to the community. So this is a paddle welcome song, and thank you again. Haishkwa. Welcome.
Thanks so much, Elder Butchstick, for the welcome. We hope to move in a good way, practice compassion, celebrate art, and tell stories tonight. Thank you again. Coming up, you're going to be hearing from James Summer. James Summer is the 2021 Youth Poet Laureate. He has been involved with the poetry community since 2017 when he joined Victoria High School's Slam Poetry Club. His poetry's content contains the most raw and passionate experiences he faces. Although hard to face, James hopes that it will connect with youth around him and that they will feel heard just as he did when he was going through high school surrounded by poets. So please welcome James Summer.
Hello, my name is James Summer, and today I'm going to perform a poem called Empty Promise. The Empty Promise. The I'll see you again and the let's hang out soon, the sentences I'm fully aware will never happen, but I let them stay in me. The empty promise keeps me awake, the empty bed when I want to crawl into my mom's and lie next to her lying, I say, I saw someone today. She asks, promise. It's the loneliness of knowing everyone you'll meet will one day just be a memory. A cup of coffee that was so good, but I'll most likely never make it like that again. We only talk about talking over coffee, but no matter how many times I text you, you can never seem to make it. There is no concrete evidence that soulmates exist. Adam could not handle the solitude, so God created Eve. Here at last is bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. And yet, in every timeline, the serpent makes an appearance. My mind feels like buying a new house every day, although the real estate agent never has anything to say except, don't buy it. Attachment theory's components include the ability for humans to grow bonds with their offspring, awakening loneliness. Awake after I've taken 3 melatonin... Awake after I've taken 3 melatonin tablets so I could sleep and not feel. I work so I don't have to listen, and I write poetry so I don't have to watch the time pass by me as existence of a system where only memories can hold the past and not even your best friend can pinky promise the future. And it's that empty promise. The compliment that I can't point out its legitimacy, the person whose body I finally thought was meant to fit into mine, like wine and bread, meaningless shapes become something if Adam gets a companion. Meaningless shapes become something. If Adam gets a companion, why don't I? Or am I not Adam? Maybe in the story, I'm the snake, representative of the fallen angel. It's the monarch that flies from west alone, although he's physically clumped up with the others, like parasites clinging to one another. He, like me, can't see through all the useless bodies, the faceless people, and I lie down at night staring at God, wondering why everyone else seems to have it together. This caterpillar has no clue on how to go about making a chrysalis, so... Instead, he wanders around an empty milkweed plant in search of anything. I seek social connections. Like a detection dog at the airport, my mattress becomes soil, so I begin to decompose. Once it is written, soundness of the heart is the life of the flesh, but envy the rottenness of the bones. It's that empty promise that I think about. A different friend group every month, and then realizing you never belong to anyone, living on the border of nothing and no one, getting no results at the bottom of a Google page and the search bar reads, is there anywhere for me to go? It's a million useless answers and far too many empty promises. Thank you.
Thanks so much, James. Raw and passionate indeed. Please join me in welcoming the next poet, Jaye Simpson. Jaye Simpson is an Oji Cree Sato Indigiqueer from the Sapatuak Cree Nations. Simpson is a writer, advocate, and activist, sharing their knowledge and lived experiences in hopes of creating utopia. They are published in several magazines, including Poetry's Dead, This Magazine, Prism International, Sad Magazine, Green Guts Magazine, Subterrane, Grain and Room. They are in 2 anthologies, Hustle and Verse 2019 and Love After the End 2020. It Was Never Going to Be Okay from Nightwood Edition is their first book of poetry published in October 2020. They are a displaced Indigenous person resisting, ruminating, and residing on Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish First Nations territories, colonially known as Vancouver. Please welcome Jaye Simpson.
Nigishnaga Ani Buju, Nigishnaga Jaye Simpson. Hi, my name is Jaye Simpson, and I'm recording from my bedroom on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territories. I'd like to thank everyone involved in inviting me to these readings throughout the past couple months. It has been a very hard time, specifically for a lot of Indigenous folks throughout the territories. I want to specifically name some of the things that have been happening for us and hold a moment of space for the 215 Indigenous children who were discovered buried in a mass grave on the unceded territories of the Lekwungen people in Kamloops. Kamloops has a very special place in my heart. I did a lot of healing there, but also beyond any of the odds, I came out as a trans person in Kamloops, and I lived very happily surrounded by a network of amazing queer people, many of them Indigenous, and it is there where I found community and mentorship with so many Two-Spirit folks, and a lot of my found family is Secwepemc, and it's been a very hard time. It's been a year of mourning for me. I've lost a lot of folks, and very recently, my father. I think as Indigenous people, I want other folks to see that we are not just trauma and we are not just pain, and that we are a fully realized, actualized people who are surviving and oftentimes asking for folks to see our humanity. I recently published a collection of poetry, It Was Never Going to Be Okay, and throughout the story there is mention of residential schools and foster care. I want folks to realize that the way conversations have been happening have been about things historically. And folks are forgetting that a lot of the traumas and a lot of the terrors are still ongoing today, just under different names and under catchphrases and hot words. I dedicated my collection to all of the queer Indigenous youth in care out there, the ones we lost and the ones who are still there. I'm going to read just a few poems and hold that space, because it always feels like Pride is meant to be a fight, but I'm seeing a lot of celebration without nuance. We are in a period of time where we can't exist without nuance anymore. It is extremely inappropriate to do so. So I'm just going to share a few poems and hold that space for what I need to feel and what my community is feeling, while also celebrating our survival. This poem is called Healing, Sacrifice, and Necessity. Saltwater brine and pine needle poultice on fresh flesh wound where the knife bit, and silver needle binding angry red back together, clenched teeth biting down on hardened leather, sage ash and red clay smeared on my face, tears streaking. Reopen old wounds to drain decade-old poison, and use traditional medicine to heal these adhesions, abrasions, and bruises. Grow hair out to braid in sweetgrass and twigs. Use creek cool clay to set fragmented and fractured bones. Lay tobacco tie after tobacco tie down. I am worth every single one. I am worth all of my healing, every prayer, every song, every ceremony. Sage lit and smoke lingering, swirling embers carried on seaward breezes, the scent sweet and pungent, The ancestors call to me through the smoke. This controlled burn will bring about new old-growth forest soon enough. There is a sacredness in cutting old hurt out, a sanctity in naming it, the ways I've been taken, a sacrifice in holding it, gently and firmly. The old ways always lead us to new ways, new waters, new healings, new learnings. It hurts in the moment, but feeling uncomfortable is a necessary part of growing. I shed my clothes now, walk tentatively through the cold. My bare feet leave footprints on the wet sand, the waves pulling at the shore, the bonfire heat to my exposed back, the darkness of the ocean calling out the drums and low growl of their song pushing me further into the vastness of the saltwater depth, wading into the coolness, sharp burning across my naked breast. I drift into her. We've done this so many times before, and now her touch lingers. Ash, clay, and blood leaking into her, and she is soaking into me. This healing hurts more than the pattern of previous takings. The grip of her is seductive, and I needn't want to leave. They come for me, rip me back to shore, return me to the fire, smoke clinging to all parts of me, and I let the fire wrap around my pallid and obvious flesh, feel my hair go up in an acrid salt blaze, the nerves of my fingers reverberate for the first time in years, feel myself for the first time in a long while, feel myself leaving one last and final taking. Out of the necessity I burn, out of the necessity I am taken. The next poem is called Waterways. And as a trans woman, the relationship to water in regards to womanhood is complicated. A lot of folks refer to women and water synonymously and oftentimes remove trans womanhood from it. And so this poem is very specifically about my Indigenous trans womanhood. I am from people made of water and blood mixing with fermentation and rich soil. I am from melding waterways and entangled red willow root system. On occasion, prairie storm bursts lightning touch upon our flesh, igniting the marshlands, sending charcoal-rich nutrients deep back into the lands. I learn from the waters how to crack open my flesh to allow fermentation to ignite, catching quickly to return what needs to be returned. I've not always tried to imitate the water of my land. I've tried to allow my body to breach like tide on stone shores, chase down saltier representations of who I was ancestrally, never realizing my bodies have never passed these waters, never had paddles caress these waves and these ways. Trans woman bodies are the ones speckled across the mixed blood lands, colonially unnamed but ancestrally aplenty, interspersed between treaty lands where my great-great-grandparents sold their treaty rights for a slice of land to farm or a boat to fish. Last summer, Cousin Al promises me pickerel, says he will feed me the cheek first, shower me in whitefish and treaty card gas prices. Al takes me on an ATV ride on the res, my hands clasping too tight as the wind whips through my messy hair, the marsh birds crying out in distaste of this res queer showing the city Indian queer what the land holds. They drive us to the river in the bed of Skunk's black pickup truck. The kid cousins show me where the safest places are to swim and where the currents would take me. A muskrat tells us we are too close to her den. These waters feel like I imagine hugging my mother would feel like now. A long time coming, a space missing somewhere in the middle. A woman at the camp teaches us how to fillet pickerel, how to eat the cheeks. She tells us that her parents' generations used to be fishers, my great-grandparents also, but they weren't allowed to eat pickerel. That was for the missionaries and the day school staff. They were only allowed to eat the bottom dwellers, sucker fish. She hands me the knife to slice the whitefish. She smiles and tells me that they would eat the mud feeder fish until the white people no longer wanted pickerel. I wish I were a small body of water up north by Swan Lake, east of Kisakus, or maybe shy of Lake Winnipegosis west of Skowhegan. Any of these vast marsh waterways would do to return to the murky silt that continues to birth prairie storm like monstrous giants crashing down on flat horizons. Sometimes I wish my body as a map, trace the migration of my kin. In the crook of my elbow is St. Ambrose, where the Ducharme siblings burst from soil and soft birch shoreline. My shoulder is where Regina has dug deep, having fled Dauphin many years prior. My auntie tells me I am my mother now. I carry her in the pocket of flesh where home should be. The dull blade of provincial child welfare carved it out over 2 decades ago. My lower abdomen is displacement, a spiritual abruption. Wombless restlessness buckles beneath fat in a place where the West Coast rests in my map of kinship. My hormone-fueled shifting body lets me unlearn muscle memories by allowing myself to touch my tender breasts and rewild my once forbidden intimacies in Skowhegan. And Auntie tells me about my great-grandmother. It is a different story from the rest, I am told. A young man ran to her house with fresh-picked rhubarb and strawberries, asking her to make a pie for his sweetheart. That evening, my great-grandmother crossed the reserve by foot to deliver the pie made with love and kinship. I sometimes wish I could have tried it. Tasted the rich juices and felt my teeth plunge into the sweet flesh of the heartberries and rhubarb. I am cracking open. The water in me pooling in preparation. I can feel this West Coast colonial queer community sneer as I beg for matchstick relief. Non-prairie folk do not understand that burning down does not mean the end. Oftentimes, when we prairie marshlanders rise from the blackened mud, we are the monsters of nightmares without them ever realizing we had ensured the health of the land and our people. In Eurocentric queer communities, trans women are the first to burn, a tempting end. How delicious it would be to watch my flesh sizzle off bone and catch the Vancouver community ablaze. If the burning flesh of a trans woman is enough to destroy a movement or space or collective, what does that say about them? I try not to burst into terrifying blaze around anyone who cannot handle it. I follow the teachings of moving the water in me to the tunes of sacred queer dance floor. Jeffrey McNeil Seymour tells me it is dancing my trauma out. With each hip shake and hair flip, feel my body becoming loose, witness the tight grip of concrete roadways sinking into the marsh of my flesh, recreating the waterways of the land that flow in my flesh. I scare off those who cling to concrete, rebar, and tar. When my jaw cracks open, dry lightning strike, fire pours out an unrelenting force, burning up nerves and synapses alike. No matter the hip shake or mud dip, this body is trauma, and trauma still needs to be excised. The water still needs to burn. Thank you. I am going to do one more. And this is a poem for children, very specifically for the hope of children. And I dedicate this to everyone who is resisting the coloniality we are witnessing right now. Language is escaping me in times like this. but also comforting me. He's called Raven. The raven returned, carrying the sunset on their wings, pulling the wind through the long grass of the plains. The raven returned when the children awoke, their bodies milk-hungry, smelling of freshly crushed cinnamon. The raven returned, our languages of love, love that raised the grass, invited the children into existence, love that brought sage, cedar, and salt and tobacco again. The raven returned as the wild strawberries ripened across the sunset plains, sweetgrass dancing with the children born from the sweat lodge. The raven returned these young ones with song and dance, words never heard before, ceremony in their souls, crying with laughter. The raven returned, having heard the music, the song and dance, the children's faces sticky from strawberries, their tummies filled. The raven returned one early evening, croaked a hello. Saltwater ocean cleansing the wounds of old, the raven returned, bringing with them dreams of tomorrow, futures built by the children, their laughter and love. The raven returned, the call of the ceremonies. The raven returned, the call of the children. The raven returns. Miigwech, I hope collectively we can invest in a future where we hold as much space necessary for each other to process and to mourn and to lead our own actions. And most importantly, I hope we can understand that somewhere we all really want a tomorrow for each other.
Thanks so much, Jay. Thanks for your ruminations, your truth, and your stories. Coming to the screen, please welcome Darrel J. McLeod. Darrel J. McLeod is Nehewak Cree from Northern Canada, Treaty 8. He has been a French immersion teacher, school principal in Yukutchi First Nations, director of a curriculum center, executive director of Education and International Affairs at the Assembly of First Nations, a chief negotiator for the Government of Canada. He is fluent in French, Spanish, and English, and is studying Cree. Darrel's memoir, Mama Scotch, A Cree Coming of Age, from Douglas and McIntyre, won the 2018 Governor General's Literary Award for Nonfiction, was shortlisted for several other prestigious awards, and has been published in French and German. Its sequel, Peakau, Reclaiming Cree Dignity, again from Douglas McIntyre, was published in 2021. Darrel is now finishing his first novel. He lives near Sook, British Columbia, and winters in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, reading, writing, and singing jazz songs. Please welcome Darrel J. McLeod.
Tanse, Darrel Sigaso, Wahia Utinia, Amisquachi Waskahiganotinia. Doris Bertha Negawi, Sunny Clifford Notawi. So I just introduced myself in my own language, Nehia or Cree, and told you that I'm from around the Edmonton area, Treaty 8 territory, and that my mother is Bertha Doris Bertha, and my father was Sunny or Clifford. It's a real honor to speak to you for Victoria's Pride celebrations in 2021 and to share in the celebrations. I wish I was able to do it in person, and I may be able to catch some of it, but it's wonderful to share my work and speak to you about my work and to read to you from my book Piagao, Reclaiming Cree Dignity, which is just out with Douglas and McIntyre a month ago. My first memoir was Mama Scotch, A Cree Coming of Age. It came out in 2018, and they're both available from local book vendors there in Victoria, both from Monroe's and Boland Books, and they're available as well from Chapters Indigo for ordering. So I have to acknowledge the incidents that we all learned about, the deaths that we all learned about at the Kamloops Indian Residential School, the discovery of a mass grave of 215 wonderful, beautiful children who lost their lives there. I just want to acknowledge them and just take a second to let that information sink in and to honor those beautiful souls who lost their lives in that institution of horror. I write about residential schools in both of my books and more about the impacts of the residential schools, which were part of a larger part of colonization, as most of you will know. And where I'm from, colonization was rapid and brutal. I've come to understand that through the writing of my books and the research I did in relation to the writing of my books. So I'm going to read to you from Piagao briefly, and I'm going to read a chapter that's entitled The Carved Cedar Bent Box in the Trunk. And in this story, Darrel, I always refer to myself in the third person when I'm talking about my memoirs. It just makes it easier for me. In this section, Darrel is emotionally distraught. His trans sister Trina, who's about 5 years older than him, has passed away, and he's having to take her home to be buried in the local cemetery where many of his relatives are buried, to bury her at the foot of their mother's grave. So Darrel is on a BC ferry in this section of the chapter, and I think the rest is pretty self-explanatory, so I'll just go ahead and read. The white Rasta man sat on the floor near the video arcade on deck 5, got out his guitar and its tattered black case, set it in front of him and began to tune. Nearly identical front-page photos from the Vancouver Sun, the Globe and Mail, and USA Today, in the hands of passengers seated around us, formed a fractured mural. The Twin Towers, a cold black cumulus cloud blasting out of one, a golden fireball out of the other. Tung. The sound of the man tuning his guitar repeated in rapid succession from the bass notes to high notes, just as the ship's horn blasted a long, deep moan. People continued to mill past, and I wondered if the man was going to busk. What was it about him that intrigued me? The fact he played music, probably reggae, or was it the beehive of dark golden hair that wafted up off his head and then cascaded into shredded wheat dreadlocks? Concert B flat, that's what trumpet players tune to. The violins tuned to something else, as I recalled. An A, the note A at the top of a D minor triad, and the French horns and trombones to something different altogether, probably F. Yes, it was F major. A C symphony by Vaughan Williams. That was the first symphonic piece I'd ever heard, and my friend Anne Butterworth, who was in her first year of university then, sang the soprano solo. I was awestruck by the rich tone of her voice, its constant flow and subtle tremolo. Anne wore a plain white blouse and a pleated black skirt the day of the final concert at the Jubilee Auditorium in Edmonton. This was similar to what she usually wore. She dressed sensibly like a nun. I was in a puffy yellow dress shirt and jeans at that concert. What would Anne think now of this Rasta man? His look, his smell, his unkempt flaxen beard, paisley kaftan shirt, tan-colored jeans and matching work boots, his bottomless cobalt eyes. I could just hear her. What a waste of talent. Trying to be something he's not, throwing away his own culture and heritage, trying to be Jamaican. He obviously comes from a privileged background and he should be studying something. And what would she have thought back then about my brother, now my trans sister, who at the time was in the early stages of metamorphosis to become Trina. I never did tell Anne about her. Anne's family owned a Tudor-style house on the south side of Edmonton overlooking the North Saskatchewan River, and she was already a respected musician and academic. Surely, she would have had to reject me if she'd found out. The only person who would kiss me during the music camp where I met Anne was an overweight girl with long chestnut brown hair. Anne may have kissed me, but it took time for me to realize that she liked me. Nobody had asked the girl to dance at the sock hop after the variety show, where she had sat frozen at a table on stage, while another pair of hands, those of a guy concealed behind her, applied her makeup, powdered her eyebrows, and drew cherry lips on her forehead, encouraged by guffaws from the teenage crowd. Sitting in the tall grass of the campus fields, we got through one awkward kiss before we both realized we were hiding. Trina had been overweight too, her words, and she thought this helped her pass as a woman. I was chubby as an early teen but went on a crash diet, yogurt and nuts for 2 weeks to lose my spare tire, so I was slim by the summer after grade 11, but I still wasn't attractive. Though years later I would understand it had little to do with my looks or weight. The Rasta man must have sensed I was studying him, the fresh blemish on his nose, specks of dirt under his uncut fingernails, and that I was conjuring his soulmate, a fair Rasta girl whose neck he nuzzled with his puffy pink lips and fuzzy facial hair. He fastened a capo around the neck of his guitar, then tucked its curvy body into his lap and reached for his pick. I hoped he would look over, compelled by my penetrating gaze. Would it offend or trouble him? Would he pity me if I told him I was about to drive a couple of 1,000 kilometers to a tiny village in northern Alberta to bury my Trina, my brother turned sister? Would he sense how distraught and afraid I was to do this alone and offer to come along for the ride, perhaps even drive a stretch of the journey that would take us up the Coquihalla Highway, through the desert of Kamloops along the Thompson River, and then through the snow-capped Rocky Mountains near snow-capped Rocky Mountains of Jasper National Park? Maybe that was how Trina's one ride in my black BMW sports car, the ride I had promised her once she got over her outrage that I had bought a Beamer instead of giving her a down payment on a condo. Is that how our ride would turn out? Me with my black hair tied back into a wavy salt and pepper ponytail, flying at 160 kilometers an hour along the 8-lane freeway with the sunroof open, a ripe wannabe Rastaman sprawled in the passenger seat, while Trina and her favorite cat, Cleopatra, rode in the urns inside the carved cedar bent box in the trunk. Well, thank you for listening to me, and I hope I get to meet a lot of you in person, maybe over the summer in Victoria, and there'll be other events related to the Victoria Festival of Authors in the fall, and I believe I'll be participating in those. So take care, and if you do read my books, please feel free to look me up and drop me a note as you're reading or after you've finished. I'd appreciate hearing from you. Hi, kinanas komitin. Sway mekakyaw nitotumak minuana ko maganak.
Thanks so much, Darrel, for your incredible work and for taking the time to be with us tonight. I often say that it takes a community to build an artist. Well, it takes sponsors to build an event. So with that, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors, the City of Victoria, Toronto Dominion Bank, Ardent West Creative, Lighthouse Brewing Company, The Zone, Fairmont Express, Canadian Heritage, Pride at Work, Fido, Esquimalt Community Arts Hub, and Boom and Balin Restaurant. Please welcome to the screen Jem Hall. Jem Hall is an itinerant artist of mixed Romani and British heritage, currently based on the unceded traditional lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Jem is interested in creative work as a means of survival and language to express stories and songs of resilience, recovery, diaspora, de-assimilation, and the magic of storytelling and witnessing. With a background in DIY zine culture and queer and trans community organizing, they use illustration, textile work, writing, harp playing, tarot reading, and plant medicines to hold liminal spaces between worlds and ways of being. They are the illustrator of the book Green Glass Ghosts, written by Ray Spoon and published by Arsenal Press. Please welcome Jem.
Hey, my name is Jem Hall. Thanks for being here today. I'm going to be reading an excerpt from this book, Green Glass Ghosts, which was written by Ray Spoon and illustrated by me. Ray and I are both very honored that this book was published by Arsenal Press this past spring, May 2021. If you're not already familiar with Arsenal Pulp, definitely check them out if you're interested in queer and trans literature. They've been around since the 70s, and there are so many treasures in their catalog, and they do so much to uplift the voices of marginalized writers and artists. Reading books put out on this press, specifically, I know has been a huge lifeline for me in terms of finding representation of people like me in print that I could relate to, especially as a queer and trans teenager. Before I really had community, I had these books. For those of you that may not be aware, our friend Ray was diagnosed with cancer at the beginning of the pandemic and is currently in the hospital receiving care for complications from that. So that's why I'm here today reading from the book they wrote. I'm looking forward to the possibility of hearing Ray do some readings in the future, mostly because their banter is way more hilarious than mine, and I'm sad to not be hearing their stories in their voice, but I'm also really glad they're taking the time to rest, and I'm happy they asked me to be here in their absence. So I'm gonna just start at the beginning to give you a taste of what the book is like without giving away too much for those of you who do want to read it. I'll start off with a quick content warning. There are definitely some topics that could be activating or triggering for some people, mostly around toxic relationship dynamics. So definitely take care of yourself in whatever way feels best for you. Okay. And this is the prologue. Did you know, I said, that Mary once threw me out of their house in the middle of the night for saying that Jules' poetry sucks? Sam howled. Yesterday, when I tried to bring up leaving for the first time, Mary dropped my house keys into a full cup of coffee. We laughed until there was a friendly pause. We were at the Denny's near Banff Trail Station in Calgary, where the servers had been letting me drink coffee and smoke since I was 14. A little over a year ago, some friends and I had celebrated the new millennium here by passing around a champagne bottle with a straw under the table at midnight. I met Sam through Mary, a mutual ex they'd come to visit for a couple of weeks. Mary was the type of person who was filled with love for everyone, and really very kind, but a quarter of the time you had to tiptoe around them or they would explode on you. Earlier that day, Sam and I had escaped from Mary's parents' house on a city bus with all of Sam's bags after they'd tried to push Sam down the stairs. All Sam did was tell Mary they had to fly home to Vancouver that night. We leaned over our steaming coffee mugs and chatted conspiratorially, trading stories about other things Mary had done, our mood bolstered by the narrow escape. We shared the same flaw of returning many times to the people who caused us harm. Then Sam said, "You should come visit me in Vancouver. It would be so fun. You can fly youth standby. $100 and an hour later, you'll be in Vancouver. You can stay with me at my parents' house." I was silent for a while as I considered it. I'd just turned 19, and it felt like time was running out for me. The cafe where I was working kept giving me fewer hours. I was barely able to pay my rent. Thank goodness for the tips I made and the odd show I played for extra money. I always showed up for my morning shifts at 6, even if I was still a bit drunk, and I paid for all the beer I drank when I fell asleep on the couch that one time. I did get in trouble with the manager for yelling outside the cafe when it was closed a week or so ago. I guess they heard me from their apartment, which was right above. Ugh, and then there was dating. On top of the on-again, off-again thing with the mutual ex, I was kind of seeing someone who'd bullied me in junior high. It turned out they were also queer, but things between us would often get really bad when we'd been out drinking. I hadn't seen them since they threw a cordless phone at me and screamed that I was fucked up and should get help. I couldn't remember what I'd said to them, so I told them to get out of my house and lock the door behind them. After I passed out, the sound of my window sliding open woke me up. They were sniffling and saying they loved me as they climbed in and fell to the floor. I played dead as they crawled into my bed and fell asleep with their arm around me. I love you, they whispered before passing out. I pretended to be asleep in the morning when they left for work. Anyway, no real reason to stay for either of them. How will I find you in Vancouver? I asked Sam. Take this bus, they said, scrawling with a pencil on their napkin. It's the same name as the street it goes down. Granville, I asked? Yeah, take it to Granville and Davie. If you don't make your flight, you can call my parents' house collect at this number. They scrawled that on the other side of the napkin. Otherwise, I'll be standing there, waiting for you to get off the bus. Okay, so that's the first little bit there. Thanks so much to the organizers of this event for bringing us here today and supporting this work. If you're interested in reading Green Glass Ghosts, you can request it at your local library. Our book is available for purchase through Arsenal Pulp Press directly, and you can also find it and order it through your local independent bookstore.
Thanks so much, Jem. What a rad sharing. And to everyone out there, if you need an illustrator for your book, call Jem Hall. Please welcome Robin Stevenson. Robin Stevenson is the author of 29 books for young readers. Her recent books include the teen novel When You Get the Chance, the picture book Pride Puppy, and the non-fiction book Pride, The Celebration and the Struggle. Her book, My Body, My Choice, The Fight for Abortion Rights, won the 2020 Sheila A. Egoff Award at the BC Book Prizes. And her books have been finalists for many other awards, including the Governor General's Literary Awards, the Lambda Literary Awards, Stonewall Awards, and numerous Reader's Choice Awards. She lives on Vancouver Island with her family. Please welcome Robin Stevenson.
Hi, I'm Robin Stevenson. Really happy to be here and taking part in Pride in the Word this year. This is one of my favorite events, and I always look forward to it. So it is a pleasure to be here. I have 2 new books out this spring that I am excited to tell you about, and they are actually both Pride related. One of them is Pride Puppy, which is a picture book for 3 to 6 year olds. It's illustrated by Julie McLaughlin, who's also a local illustrator. And it is a story about a family going to Pride to celebrate for the day, meeting up with the grandma, meeting up with friends, and unfortunately their little dog gets lost in the parade. And the book follows the family as they search for their puppy, and luckily there are lots of people around to help reunite them. It's an alphabet book, so it is has lots of things hidden in each page for kids to look for and find. It also tells a story. And what I just love about it is Julie's illustrations and just how wonderfully colorful and inclusive they are, and how much fun this book is, and I just feel like it really captures some of the joy and spirit of Pride celebrations. My other book that I wanted to share with you is called When You Get the Chance, and this one is for teenagers, ages 12 plus, and I'm going to read you a short section from this book. The book is about two teenagers, Talia, who lives on the West Coast, and Mark, who lives on the East Coast, and that kind of mirrors our situation writing the book. So I co-wrote this book with my very good friend Tom Ryan, who is also part of this event. Tom wrote from the point of view of Mark, and I wrote from the point of view of Talia. And we sent the book back and forth across the country, chapter by chapter, building the story together, occasionally hopping on the phone to brainstorm and talk about plot and character issues. It was so much fun to work on this book with Tom. We really decided to write it as an excuse to have more time to hang out together. And it was a real joy to write. So in the book, the two teens haven't seen each other for a number of years. Their families are estranged. They find themselves in Ontario because of their grandfather's funeral. Discover that they're both queer, but that they don't have a lot else in common. They're pretty different. Except they do share a desire to get to Toronto for Pride weekend. And for Talia, who's the character I wrote about, the reason she really wants to get to Toronto is that is where her high school sweetheart is. And they may just have broken up, but Talia is not really quite sure what's going on. The relationship is looking a little uncertain. And so Talia desperately wants to get to Toronto to reconnect with Aaron. And the scene that I'm going to read you is after they've arrived in Toronto and Talia has just spent the night at Aaron's brother's apartment with Aaron. I opened my eyes. We must have slept in. Bright sunlight is streaming in through Aaron's bedroom window, and I can hear the sounds of people moving around in the kitchen. It's all of 10 feet away. This whole apartment is smaller than my bedroom back home. Aaron's head is on my shoulder, their hair tickling my neck. It's hot in here, and I'm sticky with sweat and need a shower. I wriggle my arm free, roll over, and look at the clock. 10:30. We stayed up really late, talking and talking and talking. And crying. There was a lot of crying, mostly on my part. I feel totally emotionally wrung out. And even after all that, I'm still not sure where we stand. I mean, it seemed like we were breaking up, and then we weren't, and then we ended up in bed together, just like before Aaron left Victoria. We go around in circles, hurting each other, neither of us having the guts to actually end it. Neither of us wanting it to be over. The apartment door bangs closed, and everything is quiet. Their brother and his partner must have left. They got in after us last night, so I haven't even met them, which is fine by me. I don't have the energy to deal with people this morning. I wonder, suddenly, how Mark and Paige are doing and where they are right now. Beside me, Aaron murmurs something and rolls over, and then sits up abruptly. What's the time? 11. What time is the Dyke March? Aaron swings their legs over the side of the bed, pulls on a pair of boxers and a t-shirt, and stands up. Starts at 2, but I told people I'd meet them at 1. Is that okay? I kind of made plans before I knew you were going to be in town. Yeah, it's fine. Though, they could have cancelled the plans, right? If Aaron had come back to Victoria unexpectedly, I'd have cancelled my plans, if I'd actually made any, which I probably wouldn't have. When Aaron was there, I didn't feel like I needed a lot of other friends. And after they left, the last thing I felt like doing was seeing people. Coffee? Aaron asks. My brother probably left a pot. The kitchen is a little nook at one end of the living room. Aaron fills 2 mugs from a stainless steel carafe and carries them out onto the tiny balcony. Check out the view. I peer over the railing. There's another building right across from ours, and at least half the balconies are flying rainbow flags. Down the street, less than a block away, I can see the crowds gathering on Church Street. The air is warm, and the sun is shining down, making everything seem to glow. Where does the march begin? Aaron points. Maybe 6 or 8 blocks that way. Then it comes right down Church Street, through the village, and to this park just a couple blocks south of here. I sit down and sip my coffee, and for some reason my eyes are stinging and I'm suddenly holding back tears. It's not even about Aaron, for once. It's all the people down there on the street. and the rainbow flags on the balconies. Maybe it's even about Mark, and about Shirley and Babs and their stories about the Stonewall riots and queer life back in the 70s and 80s, and the people in the coffee shop last night, and even Brooke and Cade and Jack. I've talked to more queer people in the past 24 hours than I have in my entire life. This sounds stupid, but I don't think I quite grasped that there was this huge community out there. I mean, Erin and I worked our asses off to get our GSA going, and after 3 years there were still only 6 other members, and half of them were straight. But look at all those people down there on Church Street. Some of them must have been the only queer kid in their school. Or maybe they grew up in a small town where no one was out, or in a super religious family, or even in another country where it wasn't even legal to be gay. And they've all made their way here. They've all come here from somewhere. There's a lump in my throat, and tears in my eyes, and a feeling I can't describe swelling in my chest. I'm a part of this. These are my people. This is my community. I may not know exactly how I identify or whatever, but I'm pretty sure that whatever I am, there's a place for me under this great big queer rainbow. I lean over the balcony and surreptitiously wipe my eyes. Lots of people out there already, I say. It's crazy, Erin says, isn't it? I nod. In a good way, yeah. Are you... I guess you're probably used to it. All this? I wave my arm. Well, all this. It's only been 2 weeks. Has it really? 2 weeks since we were sitting on my bed, fighting, crying? 2 weeks since Erin left? It feels like longer, I say. Thank you so much for listening, and happy Pride. Take care.
Another round of applause for Robin Stevenson. Thanks so much for your storytelling. Thanks so much for your work. Up next is Tom Ryan. Tom Ryan is an award-winning author of books for young readers. His books have been Junior Library Guild and ALA Rainbow List selections and have been included on several Best of Years lists. He was a 2017 Lambda Literary Fellow in Young Adult Fiction. His 2019 release, Keep This to Yourself, was a recipient of the 2020 Arthur Ellis Award and the 2020 ITW Thriller Award and the 2021 Anne Connor Brymer Award, and was nominated for the Amy Mathers Teen Book Awards and the John Spray Mystery Award. Whew. It was also chosen by the Globe and Mail as the Globe 100 Books That Shaped 2019. His young adult mystery, I Hope You're Listening, is a finalist for the 2021 Lambda Award for Best LGBTQ Mystery. Tom, his husband, and their dog live in Nova Scotia. All right. Welcome, Tom, all the way from out east. Tom Ryan.
Hi, my name is Tom Ryan, and I'm really excited and honored to have been asked to do a reading for Pride in the Word. Victoria is a place that's very special to me and has a really important place in my heart because I lived there a decade ago for 2 years. I made lots of friends, and I really started writing seriously while I lived on the West Coast, and I can't wait until I can get back out there and hang out in that beautiful city again. So thanks so much for the invitation. And just a little bit about me. I've written several books for young readers. My most recent book is When You Get the Chance, which I co-wrote with my great friend Robin Stevenson, who will be no stranger to many of you on the West Coast. Robin is a fantastic person, a great friend, and a wonderful writer, and she and I had a great time writing this book together. It's about 2 teens on their way to the Pride Festival in Toronto. There's a lot more to it than that, obviously, but we had a great time writing chapter by chapter. I would write my character, Mark's chapter, and send it to Robin, and she would write her character, Talia's chapter, and then send it back to me. So we kind of leapfrogged it that way until we were done. We had a great time. It just came out, and I hope you all go out and pick it up. I also recently released back in October, I Hope You're Listening, which is my second queer young adult thriller. And I am so excited to say that last night at the Lambda Literary Awards, I Hope You're Listening won Best LGBTQ Mystery, which is totally shocking and surprising and exciting and beyond thrilling to me. I was a Lambda Literary Fellow back in 2017, and I actually workshopped this book with an amazing cohort of young adult writers, and it feels like everything's come full circle to me and for this book. And so I've chosen to read from I Hope You're Listening today as kind of a celebration for its Lambda win. And yeah, I hope you pick it up as well. And I hope everybody has a great virtual Pride. And with a bit of luck, we'll all be back together in the real world this time next year. So I'll give you just a bit of a background about the book. So I Hope You're Listening is about Delia D, who is 17, and approximately 10 years before the story begins, she and her best friend Sibby were playing in the forest behind their subdivision. And her friend Sibby was kidnapped in front of Dee's eyes by some people in masks. And the case is still cold. Sibby was never recovered, and Dee was the only witness to the kidnapping, but she was unable to give the authorities any information that would help them find Sibby, obviously, since Sibby is still gone. And long story short, after 10 years of dealing with survivor's guilt, some PTSD over the fact that she was unable to help the police find her friend, she decides to start a podcast to in some way make a difference. And the podcast ends up becoming very surprisingly successful. She disguises her voice. She gives herself an alias. She calls herself the Seeker. And the premise of the podcast is that she helps shine light on missing persons cases. And in some cases, this podcast has actually been successful in helping bring loved ones and their missing relatives, friends back together. And so that's kind of where things are at the beginning of the book. Dee has this very successful podcast. Sibby is still missing. Dee is struggling with that still, but she feels like she's making a difference. And all of a sudden, a young girl goes missing from the same house that Dee grew up in when she was a kid. The new owners have moved in recently, and their daughter goes missing. And Dee is suddenly faced with this choice whether she's going to maintain her anonymity or if she's going to use the success of her podcast to help find this kid. And then at the same time as all of this stuff is going on, she gets an email from a listener who basically says, Sibby is still alive out there. I know about her disappearance. And so these three cases all kind of blend together, and Dee is faced with some really difficult decisions, and really has to dig into some questions about herself, how much she wants people to know about who she is, and how far she's willing to go to learn the truth. And there's a really sweet queer romance mixed up in there, girl next door, that sort of thing. It's a book that's really was a lot of fun to write, and I'm happy that it's getting a positive reception. So here we go. This is the first 3 chapters from I Hope You're Listening. Chapter 1. Transcript of Radio Silent, Episode 41. A 17-year-old vanishes into thin air. His family and friends have no idea where he might have gone. He leaves behind no trace, no clues. Or does he? Almost 1 million people are reported missing across North America every year. If we pay attention, if we work together, maybe we can bring some of them home. I am the Seeker, and this is Radio Silent. Chapter 2. 10 years ago. Dee feels like she's been waiting outside Sibby's house forever. She doesn't want to knock on the door because then she'll have to talk to Sibby's mom and explain what they're doing, and she'll make them take Sibby's little sister Greta along with them. Greta is cute, but she can be kind of annoying, always asking questions and being slow. Besides, Dee and Sibby almost never get to play together anymore, just the two of them, and it won't be the same if they have a little kid tagging along. Dee isn't too worried because she knows that Sibby will have a plan. Sibby always has a plan. While she waits, Dee sits on the edge of the porch and swings her legs back and forth, admiring her new boots. They look just like her dad's boots, only a lot smaller. They're brown leather, the color of chocolate, with bright red laces that catch onto little hooks instead of threading through holes. They're warm, but not too warm, perfect for adventures. The front door creaks open, and Sibby's head pokes out. She grins and holds a finger to her lips. Shh! She disappears back inside, and Dee sits and waits, trying to be completely silent. A few seconds later, the door opens again, and Sibby tiptoes out. Her boots are on, and she's got one arm inside her coat. She struggles into the other arm, then leans back inside the house and yells, "I'm going outside to play with Dee." She stays there, waiting, and then Dee hears Mrs. Carmichael's voice, distant and muffled. Annoyed? Dee can't quite tell. "We won't be long," Sibby replies, and then she reaches in and pulls the door firmly closed, careful not to slam it. "Let's go quick," she says, and Dee can tell from the way she says it that there's no time to waste. She hops down from the edge of the porch onto the ground. It's only a couple of feet up, but she knows that the boots help her. She can feel them grip the ground when she lands. Giggling, the girls run to the sidewalk and turn down the street. When they make it to the maple tree at the end of the block, they both know they're out of view of Sibby's house. "I think we're okay," says Sibby, laughing, catching her breath. "Greta made a huge mess at lunchtime and Mom had to clean her up. It was a good time to escape." She grins at Dee, and Dee grins back. Sibby always knows how to make things work. "So what are we going to do?" Dee asks. "We're going to the fort," says Sibby, as if Dee is nuts for even asking. "Without Burke and everyone else?" Dee asks. She knew that Sibby would want to go to the fort, but she feels a bit uneasy. The woods are fun when there are a bunch of them playing there, but they're also dark and a bit scary. "Just because Burke's uncle built the fort, that doesn't mean Burke owns it," Sibby says, as if Dee should know this. "Besides, the woods belong to everyone, and it will be fun to play there by ourselves without everyone taking up space. Burke's sisters are annoying. They're so bossy." Dee thinks it's funny that Sibby would call someone else bossy, but she knows better than to point that out. She also doesn't bother mentioning that Mara and Alicia have only come to the fort once, right after their Uncle Terry built it, and that time it was just to see it. They're older and not into playing outside the way they used to be. Anyway, it's true that there are usually a bunch of people at the fort, but today Greta is out of the picture, Burke and his sisters are in the city to watch a movie, and the twins, Dee's little brothers, are at hockey practice. Sibby's right. Today they'll have the fort to themselves, and who knows when that will happen again. "Okay," says Dee, "let's go." They cross the street and walk 2 doors down to Dee's house, then to Mrs. Rose's house, because the easiest way to get into the woods is through her backyard. Mrs. Rose doesn't mind. She likes all the kids on their street. She's like a grandma, even though Dee knows she doesn't have any grandchildren of her own. It's the end of March, and still chilly enough for a coat and mittens, but there's a bit of warmth in the breeze, and as Dee follows Sibby through Mrs. Rose's backyard, she notices little points of crocuses poking from the ground and tiny green buds on the shrubs and trees, and she knows that spring is almost here. At the back of Mrs. Rose's garden is a hedge that backs almost all the way up onto the forest. There's a gap they can step through, and soon they're in the narrow strip of grass that separates the neighborhood lots from the trees. A cloud passes over the sun just as a breeze picks up, and Dee feels a chill run down her spine. "Let's go," says Sibby, several steps ahead of Dee. Under the shadow of the cloud, the woods look cold and dark and ominous. Dee wants to tell Sibby that they should just go over to Dee's house and watch a movie or play a game, but she knows it's no use. Sibby has made up her mind. Besides, it will be fun. Sibby's ideas always end up being fun. Sibby turns and walks into the trees. A moment later, Dee follows. Chapter 3. What happened to Sibby Carmichael that afternoon in the woods? If anyone should remember, it's me. I was there after all. But 10 years and a million sleepless nights later, nothing new comes to me. No sudden revelations, no deeply buried memories emerging from a haze. Just the same few fragments, still crisp and clear in my mind, still as useless as they've always been. It's the middle of the night, and I lie in my bed, awake in a sleeping world, a broken record skipping inside of me. The same lines skimming past again and again and again. You could have tried to stop it. Forget that I was only 7. Forget that nobody, not even Sibby's parents, blamed me. A terrified little girl, not even for a moment. None of that matters when the record starts skipping. You could have paid attention, noticed something useful, helped them find her. Over the years, I've heard lots of stories about incredible kids who beat the odds. A girl who survived on a raft for days after her whole family was murdered on a sailboat far out at sea. A boy who protected his younger siblings from a cougar by fending it off with a stick. 3 small children who climbed into a tree and waited out a tsunami, somehow managing to hang on while the only world they'd ever known rushed by, a chaos of water and destruction. Why couldn't I have been one of those kids? Why couldn't I have dug deep, found strength, risen to the occasion? You could have saved Sibby. You could have saved Sibby. You could have saved Sibby. Enough! I force myself to sit up. My shoulders slide out from underneath the pile of blankets, and the shop of crisp, cool air is good. It clears my vision and braces me enough to stand and get out of bed. I slide into my slippers and grab a blanket from the pile, pulling it up around my shoulders. Our house is old, big, and drafty. It costs a fortune to heat, as my parents never fail to remind me, so the thermostat is always down low. Because my room is up at the very top, hidden under the eaves in the attic, it's the coldest room of all, but that's a small price to pay for the privacy, not to mention the view. My desk sits in the gable at the front of the house, facing a large half-moon window that looks down over the town. I drop into the desk chair, yawning and pulling the blanket tight around me. Far in the distance, I see lights skimming past us on the highway, a rushing river of cars and trucks and buses that could easily sweep someone away in any direction in the blink of an eye. On just this side of the highway is the forest, a huge stretch of spruce and pine, some bare hardwoods clustered together, thin patches in the blanket of green. The woods butt up against a subdivision much younger than this neighborhood, full of split levels and bungalows from the 70s. My old street runs parallel to the line of trees, and my old house still sits there, tucked in for the night like every other house in town. From here, my childhood home looks tiny, vulnerable, just a small brick bungalow crouched in the shadow of the massive spread of forest behind it. It looks like the woods are about to swallow it up, drag it away, never to be seen again. I love the house we live in now in the middle of town, far from the woods. I like my room, the way it floats up here, high above the world. I like that it would take someone a lot of effort to get up here, to find me. I glance behind me at the door that opens to steps that lead down to a hallway lined with more doors. My parents' room, my brother's room, the bathroom, the study. Then more stairs, almost every step harboring a telltale creak, alarms woven into the house's very sinews. At the bottom of the stairs is a foyer, where an interior door, paned with stained glass, locked and bolted, leads out to a porch and a heavy exterior door, solid as lead, also locked. There are neighbors to either side of us, more neighbors across the street. All around us are windows and eyeballs, security. A noise catches my attention, and I turn back to my window, leaning across the desk so I can see down to the street. The cute little yellow house directly across from us has been empty for over a year, since old Mrs. Dunlop passed away. I've grown used to the for sale sign stuck into the lawn, but now I see that a U-Haul has pulled up outside. The truck is still running, exhaust billowing from the tailpipe, taillights glowing red in the night, but as I watch, it shuts off, shuddering for a moment before slumping to sleep. The driver's side door opens and a man steps out, stretching his arms above his head and yawning. A moment later, a woman steps around from the passenger side of the truck and joins him on the sidewalk. They stand looking at the Dunlop house, and then turn together to watch as a very old car pulls up and comes to a stop behind the U-Haul. It's pale blue, with wide tires and 2 wide silver stripes running down the length of the hood. The door opens and a girl steps out. She doesn't close the door, but stands behind it instead, leaning forward to rest her elbows on its upper edge and stare across at the house, like she's standing behind a shield. The man and woman walk over to talk to the girl. As they talk, they gesture toward the U-Haul. They seem to agree on something, and the man and woman move back to the truck and start digging into the cab, pulling out bags. When I shift my gaze back to the girl, she's staring right up at me. I jerk back from the window, startled, before I remember with a wave of relief that I'm standing in a dark room. She can't see me. I keep to the edge of the window and watch her head move as she runs her gaze around our house. I realize that she's checking out the veranda, the gingerbread trim, the turret. Shabby, drafty, and unfinished as it might be, ours is the most dramatic house on the street, and she's looking at it, not me. But I'm looking at her. I can't help it. She's slight, not much shorter than me, but more compact. Her black hair is cut into an irregular bob, and her glasses have thick, dark frames. She's wearing jeans, leather boots, and a dark olive-green winter coat with a wide white band across the chest. It's obviously vintage and looks to be from the same era as the car. She reaches inside her car and grabs a backpack, then slams the door shut and joins her parents, who are standing on the sidewalk with their own bags, waiting for her. Her father puts an arm around her shoulder, and together, the three of them walk up the narrow path and into the house. I glance at the clock. It's just past 3 a.m. I drop into my desk chair, pulling the blanket around me. Then I open my laptop. Except for the late arrivals across the street, everyone is asleep. My family, my neighbors, the town around me. I open my bottom desk drawer and pull out a small USB microphone on a stand. I plug it into the side of the laptop, then reach across the desk for my headphones and pull them on. Somewhere, right now, somebody is disappearing. I click on the icon for my audio recording program, and once it's loaded, I tap on the mic with my finger. I press record. It's time to get to work. So that was a reading from I Hope You're Listening, which is my most recent young adult mystery thriller, and which won the Lambda Literary Award for Best LGBTQ Thriller last night. Best LGBTQ Mystery last night. And I'd also like to give a big, bright, rainbow-colored shout-out to When You Get the Chance, which I recently released with my great friend Robin Stevenson, the Pride of Victoria. And so I hope that everybody has a great Pride Month. I hope that Pride in the Word is wonderful. I can't wait to check out some of the other readings. And I also really hope that next year we're all together in the same place in the real world. So again, happy Pride. Thanks so much for asking me to participate, and have a wonderful, wonderful month.
Thanks so much, Tom. It's so clear why you're up for so many awards. Keep on writing, keep on sharing. We look forward to your next works. Especially moving to a virtual realm, it takes a lot of human power to make it happen. So I want to take a moment to thank all of the incredible volunteers and staff, and a special shout out to Rhiannon Webb and Walter Kwan and Kelly Legg, and of course, David Tilson from Victoria Pride Society. Thanks for having me, and thanks for your efforts to make this festival happen this year. Coming up, we've got Monique Gray-Smith. Monique Gray-Smith is an award-winning and best-selling author of books for children and youth as well as adults. Her children's books include My Heart Fills with Happiness, You Hold Me Up, When We Are Kind. Her YA adult books include Tilly, A Story of Hope and Resilience, Lucy and Lola and Speaking Our Truth, A Journey of Reconciliation, which was a finalist for the TD Canadian Children's Literature Awards. Her recent novel, Tilly and the Crazy Eights, was longlisted for the Canada Reads 2021. She's a proud mom of teenage twins and is Cree, Lakota, and Scottish. Monique is well known for her storytelling spirit of generosity and belief that love is medicine. She and her family are blessed to live on the traditional territories of the Lekwungen and Saanich peoples, also known as Victoria, Canada.
Tansei. My name is Monique Gray-Smith, and my traditional name is Mistikwashkikos. I'm honored to be with you for Pride in the Word. Always love these gatherings, and while I wish we could be together, being able to gather is always good. It's good to gather. So tonight I'm going to be reading to you from Tilly and the Crazy Eights. This novel I wrote came out originally in 2018, and then this last year it was on Canada Reads Long List 2021. It's a story about Tilly and 8 elders who do a road trip from Vancouver to Albuquerque, New Mexico for the World Powwow. It was originally inspired, this idea, by one of the characters. Her name is Sarah, and she's recovering from cancer, and she goes to her, they have this gathering that they've been meeting for over 40 years in the basement of the community hall, and they call it their Stitch and Bitch. And they do all kinds of creative projects. They make moccasins and bead gloves and bead granny strings for glasses. They do all kinds of things. And she comes and she talks about all the things she wished she'd done with her life. You know, there was the reflections of having cancer and watching the movie The Bucket List. And so it is the inspiration for this trip that they go on. There are 6 women in the Stitch and Bitch. One of them is Annie, who we will meet in this short reading, who has come out from Toronto as a retired librarian to take care of her sister Sarah in her recovery from cancer. And then also on the trip comes a husband and an ex-husband. So that's how they become the 8. And in this scene, we meet Anne and Lucy. And Lucy is like a fireball. I really designed Lucy around my mom. She's like this fireball, this creative, this very gregarious, playful human who has also had a lot of hurts and a lot of wounds. And she chooses joy. She chooses life. And the 2 of them have this really beautiful friendship that would have never kind of been anticipated because of having such different temperaments and such different lived experiences. So in this scene, we catch up with them in Sedona. And it's a hot day that the 2 of them have spent kind of meandering around the streets of Sedona. And this chapter is called Friendship. That day, Lucy and Anne had been shopping for about an hour when they came across an ice cream shop and decided to indulge. As they sat under a large umbrella, relishing both the break from the sun and the cool, delicious treat, 2 young women walked by holding hands. Anne looked at them from the corner of her eye, keenly aware of her mixed emotions. On one hand, envy at the freedom these young women had in expressing their love, and on the other hand, her own discomfort at the display of public affection. It was never like that for her and Liz. Times were different back then, and it wasn't safe for them to be demonstrative in their feelings for each other. It was moments like this when Anne realized how far society had come. She turned her eyes away from the young women and looked to see if Lucy had noticed. Lucy's head was cranked as she watched them walk down the sidewalk. "Was it hard?" Lucy asked as she turned back to look at Anne. "Was what hard?" Between her reminiscing in the Sedona sun, Anne's ice cream had begun to melt, and she had to quickly lick the sides of her cone. "You know, realizing you were gay." Anne looked over at Lucy, who shook her head once and responded, "You don't have to answer if you don't want to. I know I can be a nosy Nelly sometimes, but I was just wondering, you know, what it was like for you." Anne motioned her head up the sidewalk to where the young women had walked and asked, "Seeing those 2 holding hands like that make you think of that?" "I suppose. I've wondered a few times. They just weren't the right times to ask." Anne finished off her cone, wiped her mouth, and settled in to share her story. "It wasn't realizing I was gay. It was being gay that was hard. When I moved to Toronto and that had my first relationship with a woman, I thought it was because of what had happened to me in residential school." She looked over at Lucy, and their eyes met momentarily. Neither needed to say a word. Their knowingness floated between them, a shared common experience. But eventually I learned that wasn't the case, that there was something inside me that felt more at home with women than men. And after a couple of awkward fumbles that I wouldn't even call relationships, I met Liz, and I just knew. I can't really describe it, and I know it sounds corny, but I knew she was the one. Lucy looked over at her friend with tenderness and smiled. "That's sweet. How long have you 2 been together?" "Oh, gracious, that was 1967. She let out a soft laugh. "Let's just say it's been a few years." "Were people ever mean to you?" Anne was taken off guard by Lucy's questions, but it didn't stop her from answering. "Yes, especially the first time I came home to the res. I don't know how it happened. It still baffles me. But the Moccasin Telegraph went into action, and it seemed like the whole community knew I was gay. I didn't even get to tell Sarah. That was part of why I'd come home, but she'd already heard. It was hard for her. It took a long time for her to understand. But for others, well, that's another story." A shiver ran down Anne's spine. Even though this was far in the past, the pain felt like yesterday. There was a lot of gossip, mean things said to me, and about my family. As an Indian woman, or I guess we're called Indigenous women now, she gave Lucy a wink. Lucy rolled her eyes and shook her head. Who can keep track? I still think I'm Indian. Doesn't really matter the fancy words people use. It's their tone and how they look at you that matters. Exactly. That's exactly what happened when I came home to the reserve. I'd experienced my share of hatred and bigotry in my life, but not from my own people. I think that's what hurt the most. Sadly, that's when I realized I no longer felt like I belonged at home. That's when Toronto became home. I was young and I didn't know how to deal with the ignorance, but over the years I've gotten better. It doesn't mean the remarks still don't sting. She looked over at Lucy. Sometimes they downright hurt. Lucy nodded, understanding on many levels. I'd like to meet your Liz one day. You should come visit us in Toronto. I'm sure we could find some trouble to get into. Annie nudged Lucy's arm with hers, and both women laughed. So that's a short piece from Tilly and the Crazy Eights, written by me, Monique Gray-Smith, and published by Second Story Press. As well, in 2020, it was the winner of First Nations Community Reads. And I chose that piece to read because I thought that in this time that we're living, it's important to remind us that there are many who have walked a path before us for us to have the privileges we have today. And so I just wanted to share a story about some of those women who identify as women who have walked the path for me to have the privilege I have to marry my wife, for us to raise our children. They're graduating this year, and for all the gifts I have in my life. So to those of you who are watching, who have been the trailblazers, who have been the ones who have set fires in people's hearts to change, I raise my hands to you and thank you. And to the to the young ones who are watching, may you have fire in your hearts, and may you be change makers. And may you always be watched over, guided, protected, and be kept safe from inner and outer harm. Ha, matakiwas, all my relations.
Another round of applause and thanks to Monique for your incredible work. Thanks so much. And next to the screen is more of me, Johnny Trinh. I am the next performer. And I want to just take away any illusion. I recorded my performance for tonight a few weeks ago. And so you'll be seeing a sudden costume change. And I want to say a big shout out to the amazing team at Presentation House Theatre in North Vancouver. Dear friends who allowed me to use the space, and dear colleagues that are doing incredible work there. I am currently sharing with you from the traditional unceded lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. It means a lot to be here. I've found so much growth here. And actually, it's here on this land that I birthed Stage to Page Performance Society, stagetopage.org. Check it out. That's my only plug I'd like to share, where we do online masterclasses, workshops that help poets get published. So you get to meet a panel of industry professionals working on your work, hearing trained actors reading your work. It's pretty magical. So please check it out, stagetopage.org. And if you want to learn more about me, you can go to johnnydavidtrinh.com, where you can also pick up my album. So thanks so much. Here's me. Hey Victoria Pride, it's Johnny Trinh. I'm so honored to be a part of the festival this year. Thanks for having me, especially for a great program like Pride in the Word. Thanks to all the team members that curate and make the show happen. I know we're meeting virtually. I know it's hard to have distance. I'm speaking to you today from the traditional unceded lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. I love the fact that this year's festival, this year's Pride, is focused around community. I've traveled across the land to find community. So today, I'm going to share a couple poems with you that look at building connection. I always say that it takes a community to build an artist, whether we resist against it or are nurtured by it. Finding myself, finding my pride was a journey of resistance. I left some pretty challenging spaces, traveled across this land to find a found family, a found community, and even then, there are challenges. So today, I've got 2 short poems for you. One about arriving here in the West Coast, what it means to be here, how long it took for me to get here. Another one that talks about family and Christmas in July. So here you go. Here's my West Coast love letter. I crawled up to your grousest peak, and yet I conquered nothing. I waded in the foamy tide, found no pearls, but saw the ocean. Shoreline to ceiling, I saw your proudest, and felt my weakest while spending more than I can struggle, looking for myself. I felt the kindness of nepotism, the rain of cold shoulders. I faced pages and pages of anonymous lovers, but no one said hello. I saw the mad, the homeless, and their children. Too honest to steal, too positive to work, too dirty to sell themselves on the street. Pride had nothing to do with it. But I fell in love on the train 3 times, ate fresh fish the size of my fist, and sweat until my soft-sided belly grew smaller than my security, and still it wasn't enough. I saw the most beautiful faces on the most beautiful bodies, fell apart. And now I see where only I can go. I live in melancholy, wishing back the breath you took away. I leave unromanced because I see how much I'd fit in here, but would need to fight for your citizenship. I've meditated and inverted, reversing the time so I could savor your cleanest cuisine. But I must return to the grass, where the flat plains are dry and hot, until the cold fronts bring the coldest snow. I'll return someday, perhaps as someone else, waiting to fall in love again. I wouldn't change one drop of joy from the million that you've given me. Despite the stark sorry that surrounds my drive, there is still fuel yet to bring me home. Home to you, one day you'll be. Home for me, one day you'll be. Home where I can plant my roots to the stone and down into the ocean floor. A dear colleague of mine often quotes this line. He asks the question, where are we going? Always home. You're either leaving a place to go home, you're leaving home to come back home, you're leaving to find your new home. I think that's the same as community. I had to travel very far, and I'm still traveling. But it's not just one way. Oftentimes we go back. Sometimes we have to go back. And so everyone out there celebrating Pride, if it means that you're struggling as well, that there are some relationships that need healing or space, this one's for you. I think that our existence is a gift. I think that life is a gift. And this one is inspired by Christmas in July. Hide your presence. Hide your truth. Hide your time lost in flight. Hide the light they bred into you. Be dim. Cast little shadow. Fade into the background. It's only once a year. Play pretend. Play carols. Play piano lessons learned. Play 5 years old before you were a disappointment. They will hate the mangoes you bring, but they'll eat them all up. They will say no gifts, but dance in the fashions you offer them. They will claim that your jade is fake, but keep your stones close to their hearts. They will call you fat, regardless of their waistline. They will call you bald, regardless of their hairline. They will see in you a mirror, and for all their pride, there is equal shame. They will be proud of parts of you, but it won't be enough. You've lived many lifetimes in this house, in this family you've ever only known. Never enough. And then it's dim sum. Don't eat too much. Then it's dim sum. Ha gao siu mai chong fan. Make sure you pay the bill. Then it's dim sum. It's okay to smile and enjoy this. Then it's dim sum. Tao hu fa. Savor this as it marks your pending departure. And then finally, leave. Regain time lost. Regain sleep lost. Glow again. Change your home screen again. Put on your rings and your bling again. This Christmas is not a very special Christmas. It's just like every other one you've lived through. Maybe survival is your gift. And one more time, thanks to all our readers and authors tonight. Darrel McLeod, Jem Hall, James Saunders, Jay Simpson, Monique Gray Smith, Robin Stevenson, Tom Ryan, and me. The links to places like publishers and where to buy our books or buy my album or anyone's album can be listed in the information below. So check out the site and please support artists. Thanks so much. Thanks so much to you, audience. I've been really on this big soapbox tonight and pretty much every day about community and how we build it. I'm a really firm believer that it takes listening and it takes space holding. And I know tonight so many of our artists and storytellers were sharing pretty vulnerable stuff. And you were holding it for us, so thanks for listening. It takes this relationship, this reciprocity to build connection. So share that with the world, share the event, and thanks for being here tonight.